Hey guys! Today it is finally time for me to share the results of my 2023 palette usage project. In 2023, I decided to take on the task of tracking every single palette usage of the year, and now I'm going to rank all my palettes in order from my least used to my most used of 2023. Now, there are definitely some limitations to this, I guess, because some palettes I didn't have for the entire year, but I'm ranking them against palettes that I did have for the entire year. And then there's also the fact that my usage isn't always technically organic. Last year, I did roll some palettes into my project pan for a time, so those ended up being some of my most used palettes of the year. So I might do this again in 2024, because this year I'm not going to be doing any panning, so my usage will be a bit more organic. Anyway, I'm undecided if I'm going to do this all throughout 2024 as well, but part of me is kind of curious to see what my usage will look like this year now that I'm not doing a project pan, so I'm just going to be using my palettes freely throughout the year. Also, I did want to shout out the inspo for this series because I didn't come up with this idea myself, but I know a few other people have done this on YouTube and on Instagram. Kaylin on Instagram was a big inspiration for me, as well as Lauren May Beauty here on YouTube did a similar thing on her channel in 2022. So thank you to them for the idea, because this was really eye-opening. I did manage to use every palette at least once, and the way I count a singular use is if I dipped into the palette at all in one makeup session, then I count that as one use. So whether I used one shade or all the shades in the palette, it counts as one use for that day. Also, in this video, I'm only going to be ranking the palettes that I currently have in my collection. So there were some palettes that I decluttered at some point during the year, and those I don't have to show in this video. So I have 45 palettes to rank, so let's get started. Starting with my lowest ranked one at number 45. This one I used one time, ranking this the lowest because this is the only palette that I used once that I also had for the entire year, and it is the Urban Decay Naked Sin palette. This is one of the few Urban Decay palettes that I still own, and I'm surprised but also not surprised that I only used this once last year. I mean, I am definitely attracted to this color story. Like, I know it's very basic and boring. In fact, one of the shades is even called Boring. This one, it's actually my favorite shade in the palette. But I guess there's just nothing about this palette that makes me reach for it. I also realized I don't think I ever put this in my seasonal palette basket at all in 2023. So it just kind of slipped through the cracks and I didn't end up using it. But at the same time, I'm hoping to get more use out of this year, because I do really I like these colors. I feel like I can get just a really easy everyday look with this palette. And like I said, this Boring shade, the crease shade here, is like my perfect sort of rosy beige matte crease color that I'm always talking about. That's like my favorite color to just start out the crease. So definitely nothing against this palette, but there's really nothing remarkable about it either. So we'll see if I end up using this more in 2024. You know what? I think I'm actually going to go ahead and put this in my winter palette basket, because this is totally a great, I mean, I think it's a good color story for year round, but with the rosy shades, I think this will make a really pretty, like, soft Valentine's Day palette as well. So I'm just gonna put that in my palette basket right now. The next palette I only used once in 2023 was this one. This one I received, I think, in September. This is the Alter Ego Sakura palette, and like I said, I received this in the fall. And to me, this is a very springy palette. I mean, even just looking at the outer packaging with the flowers, there's even a shade in here called Spring. Really, this just isn't the kind of color story that I'm reaching for in the fall and winter, so I think that's the main reason why I only used it once. But I'm definitely planning on pulling this out in the spring and playing with it some more, because I do think these are really pretty for the spring. And I love the mix of minty shades and pinks and taupes. I think this is supposed to be a dupe for Natasha Denona Retro Glam, if I'm not mistaken. I do really like the way that they laid out this palette, though. I think it makes a lot of sense having the taupes and browns over here, the pinks in the middle, and then the mints over here. The mints, that's funny. The greens over here on this side. So yeah, I guess I don't have much to say about this palette because I've only used it one time, but I'm really excited to really dig in and use this in the spring. Another palette I only used once, and this one I bought in October. This is another one that I just think is such a spring and summer kind of color story to me. This is the Flower Beauty Coastal Lights. I actually think this would make a great complement to the Sakura palette now that I'm looking at it. Like, doesn't it kind of just look like the sister of Sakura? yeah, I'll have to keep that in mind for the spring. But both of these will definitely be in my spring palette basket. And I like that with this palette, compared to the other lights palettes, they went with some slightly different finishes. This palette has way more like subtle satin shades rather than the super foiled glittery shades that the other lights palettes have, so I think that's fun. Both of those will be in my spring palette basket. The last one I only used one time this year, but this one I also got towards the end of the year. This is the Kaja Beauty Bento in Peach Madeleine. Again, peach is just more of a color that I reach for in the spring and summer, and I love peach eyeshadow, so I'm excited to use this more. But it has this peach matte and then two shimmers. So one is more like a subtle, soft peachy shimmer, and then a more foiled champagne shimmer. There were 8 palettes that I used twice in 2023, and all 8 of them I had for the entire year, so that makes it a little bit easier to rank them. First up, we have an oldie but a goodie, the Athr Beauty Citrine Quad. I love this little quad. I love that it has just 3 shimmers and 1 matte. I feel like it just makes it so simple to do a warm, neutral eye look. It has quite a bit of overlap with the Sigma Ambiance palette, which, spoiler, that was one of my top ranked palettes of the year as far as usage goes. So I think that's part of why I didn't use this one as much this year. 2 more quads that I used twice each in 2023. These are the Hard Candy Moods quads. I have the shades Buzz and Purr. Buzz is this adorable monochrome yellow quad. I love this one. It's not often that I do a yellow look, so I think it makes sense that I didn't use this a ton, but I still love it. And it also makes me think of Bee, my cat. And this one makes me think of all 3 of my cats because it's called Purr. This is a very like smoky mauve color story. Again, I used to wear mauve eyeshadow all the time. Like, if I was wearing any sort of neutral-ish color story, it was going to be something mauve. These days, I'm just not as into mauve as I used to be, and these shades are just very smoky, so again, it's just not like, it's not like an everyday quad for me, but I do still enjoy it from time to time. Another oldie but goodie here, the Flower Jungle Lights palette. I used this one twice as well. As I have said, like, this is one of my favorite eyeshadow formulas. Like, I just think these palettes are so much fun, but as I'm noticing with this project, I do not reach for these as much as I thought I did, apparently. Maybe in years past I did, but I think it might just be because they're all shimmer, and I love shimmer eyeshadows, but unless I'm doing just a one and done look, which usually if I am doing a one and done look, I'm not going to be grabbing a palette. I'm going to use a single or an eyeshadow stick. And that's what I think these palettes are best for, is for a one and done metallic eye look. I mean, I've definitely used more than one shade at a time as well, but I'm either going to be doing a complete eye look, which usually for me includes some matte shades, or I'm just using a single shadow for a one and done look. But these shades are gorgeous, so I really would like to make a point to use all of my Flower Lights palettes more this year. I also used the Estate Mystic Forest palette twice in 2023. That really doesn't surprise me because to me this is such a specialized palette. Like, it's so specific. It's just not the kind of thing I'm using all year round. It's more the kind of thing I pull out when I'm in the mood for it, which is, you know, apparently a couple times a year. I also used my BH Cosmetics Mimosa palette twice in 2023. This is another very specific color story, not the kind of thing I'm using all the time. The 2 times I used this, once was in the spring and once was in the summer, which makes a lot of sense to me. These are really the kinds of colors that I like using in the warmer months, not so much in the fall and winter, so that's why, you know, I haven't used this in quite a while. Since July, to be exact. Also used my BH Cosmetics Lost in Los Angeles palette twice. This I did depot in 2023 so that I could rearrange the shades. I don't love that this palette has like this huge blank space. I really need to just organize all of my singles in a better way. And I'm also debating, I'm not sure if I'm going to, but I'm debating depotting both of my other BH Cosmetics palettes, Mimosa and Saint Tropez, because I feel like it would be fun to just mix and match all of the colors and just have them be part of my singles collection. I'm thinking about it, but I've kind of got the itch to depot some more things, and we'll see. We'll see if I do it, but that's Lost in Los Angeles. The last palette in the 2-use club was the Ace Beauté Aura palette. And this seems to be a common theme among these lesser used palettes, is these are very specific color stories. This one is really fun. It's like a purple and berry and green mix. Really fun for spring. I think this was the first Ace Beauté palette I tried, and really especially love the shimmer formula in here. It is just insane. So wow, I'm looking at this and I'm like, ooh, this is so pretty. I'm excited to use this come springtime, as I've said for a lot of these. Then there were 6 palettes that I used 3 times this year. Only 2 of them were ones that I had for the entire year. First up, we have my last BH Cosmetics palette. This is the Summer in Saint-Tropez. Does anyone remember when this was all I could talk about in like 2021? This was like my favorite palette of the year, and I think it was 2021. I still have a fondness for this palette. I think it's such a fun one. A great palette if you're a beginner to color, I think. I don't know if they sell this one anymore though. And as you can see, I have massive pan in this shade right here. This is another one of my favorite rosy beige shades in my collection. Also, this was one that I think my friend sent to me in January of last year, so I did have this for pretty much the entire year. This is the Quo Stacked Eyeshadow in Snowcone. They're clearly trying to dupe the Kaja Beauty Bentos here, but this is actually a quad rather than a trio. It is hard to open. This is part of my winter palette basket. I think it's a really fun color story for winter. Some cool taupes, and then this pop of like minty green. I definitely don't think they necessarily duped the quality of the Kaja eyeshadows. Like I do feel like, especially with that minty shade, you really have to build it to get the intensity that you see in the pan here. But I love how compact it is. I mean, I have some single shadows that are about the same size as this quad. Next up, we have the Ace Beauté Flora palette. I loved this floral collection they came out with last year. This one I didn't have all year. This one I received in April. I feel like I've never seen a color story like this in another palette. I mean, I'm sure it exists somewhere out there, but I think Ace Beauté has some of the most unique color stories I've seen. And I love yellow eyeshadow. I love that there's like a few different yellows in here, but then they also complement that with some really rich reds, and it's just so much fun. Then a palette that I bought in June, so I had this for only half the year, but I did use it 3 times as well. This is the ColourPop Sweet as Can Be palette. The main reason I bought this, well, let's be honest, the only reason I bought this is because I have a cat named Bee and I'm obsessed with her. So anytime something has a bee, like a play on words with bee in it, I have to have it. So, but I also just think it's so cute. Like, I love Winnie the Pooh. He's just such a cutie pie. The packaging is adorable. I do think this color story is really pretty as well. Is it anything that unique and revolutionary? Did I, like, probably already have most of these colors in my collection? Yes, but it just makes me happy. And I'm really wishing I had gotten more use out of this in the fall specifically, because I think that the main times I used this was in the summer, and I do think that a lot of these colors are great for fall. There really is a lot you can do with this. Like, you can go grungy, you can stay like light and rosy, you can do something green. Just, yeah, there's a lot of options in here. Then we have the Unleasha Glitterpedia number 7. This one I received in September, so only really had it for the last few months of the year. And I'm surprised I used it 3 times just because these are really more like spring colors for me, but some of the other Glitterpedia palettes are all shimmer. So I like that they actually did include some mattes in here, because I do think that will make me more likely to use it as a standalone palette. But this has some really pretty glittery shades, and all the glittery shades have like varying levels of glitter and sizes of glitter particles, so you can just get a really fun look with these. If you like glittery toppers, this is great. The last palette I used 3 times, this one I only had for the last 3 months of the year. This is the Nomad Air Travel palette, and I did travel with this. I think this is a great travel palette because it pretty much has everything you need for a neutral look. 3 different shades of brown and then 3 different shades of shimmer. You can do something light, you can do something smoky. And it was nice to see a smaller palette from Nomad, because a lot of their palettes are really large, and this one is just nice and compact. And I think it's so smart too, the travel collection, because they are a travel themed brand. So it's cool that they came out with products that are specifically for travel. Now for the palettes that I used 4 times in 2023, which 4 uses in a year is kind of a lot compared to some of these. I mean, there were a lot of palettes that I didn't even use 4 times. So I think we're getting into the territory of, you know, wow, I used that an impressive number of times. So first up, we have the Urban Decay Stone Vibes palette. This was one of my favorite palettes in 2020. So old, but I still love it. The shimmers are definitely starting to dry out a little bit, but I'm gonna keep it until I just can't use it anymore, because I just love this palette. I love that it is mostly shimmer, and all the shimmers in here are just so dimensional and shimmery and fun. I have 2 pans in here, which I'm proud to say, so that one I used 4 times. I also used my Essence Coral Me Maybe palette 4 times. This is a great pocket palette. A lot of the writing has rubbed off of it. but you know, what can you expect from a $4 palette? I do think the shadows themselves are really great quality, a really well balanced color story in my opinion, and all of the shades perform just amazingly. So such a steal. I still can't believe the price on this, and I still think it's amazing. Desert Lights I did actually use 4 times in 2023, so that's pretty good. I'm actually happy with that, especially because, like I was saying, as much as I love the formula of these, I just feel like I don't end up using them nearly as much as I would think that I would. But I did manage to use this a reasonable number of times, at least for me, in 2023. I know 4 times is not that many times, but when you have this many palettes, it kind of is. I just love these colors. They are so impactful on the eyes. My ABH Norvina palette I used 4 times as well. Definitely fewer times than I must have used it in 2022, because that was the year that I was trying to do a pan that palette with this palette. And I did manage to hit pan on a lot of the shades. I didn't hit pan on any more shades this year, which is funny. I mean, I only used it 4 times, so I wouldn't expect to hit any more pans. I think I'm close to hitting pan on Incense though, and I would at least like to hit pan on that shade before I retire this palette. I do think this is probably going to be the year that I need to retire this because it is getting really old. I definitely feel like the mattes don't quite perform like they used to, but the shimmers have held up really well, and the shimmers are really my favorite part of this palette anyway, so I just love this palette. I actually just rolled it into my winter palette basket, so definitely want to do some looks with this around Valentine's Day. Really proud of myself for using the Ace Beauté Flare palette 4 times in 2023. This one really intimidated me, and it's funny because this is one of those palettes that like I had on my wish list for such a long time, and then when I got it, I was like, what was I thinking? Like, why did I think I would want this palette? But when I push myself to use it, I do have a lot of fun with it, and this is one of those palettes that kind of fills in a lot of gaps in my collection as far as colors go, because a lot of the colors in here I just don't have in other palettes, so it's nice to supplement with this. It's sort of like a muted rainbow palette. I say muted because it's not like, you know, just straight up rainbow colors, but you have just a little bit of every color of the rainbow in here, which I think is really fun. So those are all the palettes that I used 4 times that I also had for the entire year. The rest of these I acquired at some point throughout the year. Another one from the Ace Beauté Floral collection, this is the Begonia palette, and this one I've had since April, and I used it 4 times, so pretty proud of that. 2 of the times I used it actually were in December. I did decide to go ahead and leave this in. I know I said in my recent chore day vlog that I was going to take this out of my winter palette basket, but I decided to leave it in because I really don't know what I was thinking when I decided to remove this, because I think this is perfect for Valentine's Day, especially like this region of the palette right here, with the mauves and the pink and the deep red. Definitely want to try to use this more throughout the rest of the winter, and I love this packaging so much. It is so pretty. Next up, this one I've had since June. This is the Sigma and Angela Bright palette. This is such a versatile palette to me. I feel like it has a little something for every season. I just think Angela did a great job putting this palette together, so kudos to her. The Alter Ego Coastal palette, this one I've had since July, and I also used this one 4 times. This one I also just added into my winter palette basket, and I think this one's going to be so fun. In this like late winter and even into early spring. This has some really like wet looking shimmers that I cannot wait to put on my eyes again. It's been a while since I've used this one, so really excited to reach for this again soon. Then the newest one to me in the 4-use club here is the Flower Garden Lights palette. This one I bought in October, and I have already used it 4 times, so that's pretty good. I did put this one in my holiday palette basket, so I think that helped me get more use out of it, but this is so pretty, and I especially think I'm gonna love this in the springtime. There are 3 palettes I used 5 times in 2023. We have the ABH Sultry palette, such a classic. This one I used, most of the times I used this was actually towards the end of the year. Yeah, this palette is still so good. I'm like, every time I use it, I'm so impressed, and I really feel like this is a palette that would sell even in 2024. I know, like, didn't this come out? I guess it was like 2018 that this palette launched, and it was limited edition, but it made such an impact. I know they came out with a mini version of this, but honestly, I wish they would just come out with the original one again, because I think so many people would buy it. I mean, people have been asking them to restock it for years, but I don't think they're going to. This one I bought at the very beginning of 2023. This is the Wet n Wild Call Me Sunshine palette. I used this one 5 times. I was really happy to get back into Wet n Wild this past year because they really have some of the best eyeshadows at the drugstore. They always have. And I love this one duochrome shade over here. That shade looks so expensive on the eyes. So that was a great find last year. Then this one I bought right when it came out in March. This is the Odin's Eye Sea Talk palette, which was in collaboration with Lauren May Beauty, who I had the pleasure of meeting recently, and she is stunning, and it was so nice to meet her. This is actually the only Odin's Eye palette I've tried, but I was really impressed with the quality of these shadows, especially the shimmers. Wow. I am remembering, like, as I'm looking at this, how much I love these shimmers, especially this shade. This shade right here, Smoky Pearl, is gorgeous. I remember the first time I put that shade on, I was just floored. I was not expecting it to be so sparkly. This is just such a perfect, slightly purpley taupe. Next, we have 3 palettes that I used 6 times this year, starting with the Kaja Beauty Bento in Chocolate Dahlia. This is the only one of these 3 that I had all year long. This is just a downright useful trio. This really is like a complete look in a trio. You've got a deep matte, a light matte, and a shimmer. It's just easy to use. It's super compact, like I was saying. Like, I love how small it is. This is the kind of thing I grab for when I'm just doing a quick look. I just, I just want the palette itself to decide for me what my look is going to be. That's what I use this for, because it's just so easy. I don't have to think about it. I put the light matte in the crease, the shimmer on the lid, and then I might use the deep matte for a liner, and I just know it's going to look good. And I love it. This one I've only had since March, but I did use it 6 times. This is the Nomad Royal Europe palette. Love all the jewel tones in here. This bottom row is all multi-chrome shades. I just feel like every time I use this palette, I get such a unique look. And this one I've only had since July. This is the Alter Ego Goddess palette. Lots of warm tones in here. It's grungy, but at the same time, there's a lot of neutrals. So I feel like it's, kind of like a grungy palette that doesn't intimidate me, so I really like that. And really this year I discovered I just love warm tones on myself. I like cool tones as well, especially with eyeshadows. I can go either way, but there's just something about a warm golden look that is just so yummy. And I love the pops of green in here too. This year I also really got into green eyeshadow. Never really been a huge green eyeshadow person, but I love it now. It's one of my favorite eyeshadow colors. We have a very needy kitty here. Oh my, your tail is all fluffed up. You look like a raccoon, Tala. Wow. Oh my goodness. What a sweet pea. You love making appearances on my channel, don't you? The next 2 palettes I used 7 times in 2023, and both of these surprised me because it's actually been a long time since I used either one of these. Both of these I used all 7 times in the first half of the year. So first up, we have the e.l.f. Earth and Ocean palette. I guess I did use this 7 times. 6 of those times were in March, and 1 time was in April. How did I use this 6 times in March? I guess I was just really into this in March of this year. They discontinued this palette, which made me so sad because this was such a great palette from the drugstore and just such a well thought out color story. This was back before e.l.f. was duping every brand and their mom, like when they actually had original products. I kind of miss those days, even though, I love dupes, don't get me wrong, but I kind of miss when e.l.f. came out with actual inventive stuff like this. Like this was just a color story that you did not see very often, and it was just so cool to see it from e.l.f. And the quality of this palette was really good. So still love this and glad I got so much use out of it, even though it was all in the first half of the year. I also used my custom Lethal palette 7 times, but all the times I used it were January, April, and May. That's when I was using it. I guess that makes sense because even though I wanted this palette to be like for all seasons, I definitely think it leans very spring and winter too. There's a lot of palettes and I'm like, wow, I should have put that in my winter palette basket. I'm gonna toss this in my winter palette basket because I really like this top row for the winter, kind of like snowy, frosty colors. So that's gonna go right into my palette basket. Okay, there were 3 palettes that I used 7 times. This palette I've only had since June, but I used it 7 times, the Nomad Okavango Safari. I was on Nomad's PR list in 2023, so I was able to try all of their palettes for the year. This was one of my favorites. I would say, yeah, this would be top 3 for sure. And this was the palette that kind of got me into olive green, which I've never been a fan of olive green on myself. But especially when my hair was more red, I mean, it kind of still is like a strawberry blonde. I think green looks so good on redheads, or if you have any redness to your hair. Of course, green is complementary to red, so it makes sense. But yeah, a few years ago, I would have hated this palette. I would have thought it was so ugly, but now I love it. I love it. Can't get enough. I want to use it again. I want to use all of these again. I'm gonna have to do, maybe I should have like a month where I challenge myself to wear makeup every single day. That'll be fun. Palettes I used 8 times. I feel like we're now getting into like my true favorite palettes. This one, I'm so happy that this one landed so high up on the list. This is the Athr Beauty Rose Quartz palette, an old discontinued palette, but I love it. Actually, 7 of the 8 uses were in December. And most of those times I was mainly dipping into this shade, the one that has pan here, Sandstone. I love this shade so much, and I am getting nervous for the day that I run out of it because I just feel like I've never found an eyeshadow that does quite what this does. I know it looks like the most boring shade of all time, but I'm telling you, it just does something special on my eyes. The way it melts in with my skin tone, it's just perfect. So I really need to go on like a swatching spree of my collection and just swatch every shade I can find that looks like this and just see if I have any dupes of it, because I wish I had this in just a single, because I would use it so often. This is just the kind of color that can get any eyeshadow to blend into my skin tone perfectly. It's just like the perfect transition shade. I like the rest of the palette too, don't get me wrong, but really what I love the most about this palette is the mattes. I think the mattes in here are just the best, like truly the best mattes I've ever tried. My favorite of the Ace Beauté Floral collection, clearly I did use this one 8 times, the Cala palette. Whoa. This palette is next level. This is kind of in a similar category to me as Sultry from ABH. Leaning towards cool tones, you have some silvers and just a lot of really smoky, sultry shades. This, in my opinion, is better than Sultry. Like, if you made me choose between this one and Sultry, I would actually choose this one. Like, the shimmers in here, I feel like you can tell just looking at it in the pan even. Like, do you see how reflective those are? You can practically see your reflection in these shimmers. They are that just glassy. I wore this to a holiday party. It's just like, if you want a sultry glam look, this is your palette. That I would say was one of my favorite palettes of the year. I did use it 3 times in April, which was when I got it, and then 2 times in November, 3 times in December. So this was very much a November and December palette, which makes sense to me, but I just love it so much. Then this next palette was actually in my best of 2023 video, the Alter Ego Midsummer palette. I just love the shades in here. This one is a dupe for ABH Nouveau, which honestly has always appealed to me, that palette, so I was happy to be able to try the more affordable version of it. I love that it's a mix of greens. You've got this whole like green quad over here, then a bunch of warm tones, which I love, and then a lavender, which is just such an unexpected pop. Another great palette for the entire year. Like, the fact that it's called Midsummer kind of like makes me categorize it as a summer palette, but I need to stop doing that, because it really is just a great everyday palette in my opinion. We're in the double digits now. There are not very many left to talk about. The one palette that I used 10 times this year was Sigma Ambiance. Where did this come from? Up until this year, like, I've really never been a huge fan of Sigma's eyeshadows, but I do feel like with some of their more recent launches, like I know Ambiance came out a couple years ago now, but I definitely think the quality and the performance of this is way better than Enchanted. That one I had and actually decluttered earlier this year because I just was not a fan of just the way those shadows performed. A lot of the shimmers were just very lackluster. The mattes were kind of patchy, but I have not had any issues with Ambiance. I love this palette. I think, you know, the number of times I used it speaks for itself. And those were all organic uses too. A lot of the palettes that are up here in these double digits were ones that were in my project pan or ones that I did like a 1 week one palette or something like that. So I should have included this in my best of 2023 video. I really should have, because I just love it. And this is another thing that a few years ago I would have just not had any interest in this palette. In fact, I remember like roasting this palette at one point because I was like, all those matte browns look the same. At least they did in the photos, okay? In person, they don't look quite as the same. I mean, yes, like this is an all brown palette, so you have to like warm browns. But now that I love warm browns and warm tones, this is just such a useful palette. Yeah, I'm so excited to continue using this in 2024 and hopefully get some dips going in these shades. Palettes I used 12 times. Now this is funny because all 3 of these I did an X Looks 1 palette with them. So first we have Sigma Nomad. This one I did do a 7. Can you decide where you want to be, please? So first we have the Sigma Nomad palette. I used it 12 times. 7 of those times were for a 7 Looks 1 palette video, but I used it 5 times outside of that, so that's still a lot. And I think I would have used it, if I hadn't done the 7 Looks 1 palette video, I think I would have still used it probably like 8 times or so at least. Interestingly, all of my uses though were in the first 4 months of the year. I actually haven't used this since April, which is crazy to think that it's one of my most used palettes of 2023, but I haven't used it in that long. But I did just put this in my winter palette basket. I feel like of all my palettes, this is one of the best for Valentine's Day. And I'm not even a big fan of Valentine's Day, but I just get excited for any kind of like themed makeup time of year. I like following the seasons and the holidays. It's just fun for me. So I am feeling very inspired looking at this. Like I cannot wait to do some more looks with this. Love the mix of taupes and rosy colors. I think the deep brown mattes in here, I found just the tiniest bit skippy on my eyes, but I definitely prefer the quality of this one over Enchanted. Probably not quite as much as Ambiance, because like I said, Ambiance I've had 0 issues with. This one I do remember saying that some of the deep mattes were just a little bit tricky, but typically the really deep shades I only use for eyeliner anyway, so it's not that big of a deal to me. Also used the Nomad Verona palette 12 times. This one I did a 3 looks 1 palette video with when it came out, so only 3 of those 12 uses were for that video. That means I used it 9 times organically. I used it a bunch in January and February, and then once in October, once in November, and once in December. The only thing about this palette is I do kind of wish that these were just 2 separate palettes, because first of all, these 2 sides could not be more different. Like, I think I did 1 look where I used both sides, and it was for my 3 looks video, just because I wanted to, you know, see how they could work together. But that's the only time I've used both sides in 1 look. Every other time I am just usually using this side, honestly. This is my favorite, and I love it so much, but it is such a bulky palette. I don't love the shimmers in here as much as other Nomad palettes. I do feel like these are just really hard packed. This was the first Nomad palette I tried, so I didn't really have anything to compare it to at first, but now that I've tried some other Nomad palettes and seen what they're capable of shimmer-wise, I just feel like a lot of these, especially this shade, which is my favorite shade in here, but it's just so, like, you really have to, like, scrub your finger in there to pick it up. But then this shimmer down here is a little bit easier to work with. So I don't know, it's just a little hit or miss in terms of shimmers. But one of you guys reminded me I need to put this in my winter palette basket. I don't know what I was thinking, but I forgot to put this in when I was picking out some like Valentine's Day palettes in my chore day vlog. And I completely forgot to put this one in, even though, hello, this is like the perfect Valentine's Day palette. But I'm excited to use this side again because I don't think I have used it since the beginning of last year. Then this one is really impressive to me because I only bought this in October, so I've only had it for 3 months, and it is one of the highest ranked for total uses. I used this 12 times. Natasha Denona, I Need a Nude. I'm glad I've used it that many times because this was expensive and I am gonna use it. Like, whether I like it or not, I'm gonna use this palette. I did do a 1 week 1 palette with this, so that is where a lot of the uses came from. And I did come to find it's not as versatile as I would like it to be for how expensive it is. And I know, like, you can tell by looking at it, it's not going to be the most versatile palette ever, but I really just feel like there's too much overlap between these shades. Like, this is way worse than something like Sigma Ambiance, which aside from the, well, I guess this one does have 2 deep browns, which I feel like is unnecessary. But aside from those, all of the shades in here are at least distinct from one another. Like, there are no 2 shades in here that are going to look exactly the same on the eyes. But with I Need a Nude, these 2 light taupe mattes are almost exactly the same color. There is just the tiniest difference between the 2, but really, like, there's not much of a detectable difference on the eyes. And there's a lot of mid-toned taupe shimmer in here. These 2 right here, they don't look that similar in the pan, but on the eyes, they're so similar. Ella and Filigree, I just feel like if they had swapped out one of those and one of those light taupes for something different, it would have just added so much to this palette. And I also feel like the quality of the shadows in here is not what I would expect for such a high-end palette. I do feel like the mattes in here can get a little bit patchy, especially the deepest one, Silhouette. I do not like the formula of that shadow. It's skippy, it's patchy, it's kind of hard to blend, it like sticks to one spot on your eye. So yeah, the longer I've had this, the more and more I just have started to be bothered by those honestly rather big flaws that it has for such an expensive palette. I don't know that I would buy another Natasha Denona palette after this. Like, even though I've enjoyed it, I've used it a lot, I'm gonna keep using it a lot because the shades themselves, like I do get really gorgeous looks with this palette that I love, so I'm still going to use it. And the palette itself is so nice to hold, like it feels very sturdy. Yeah, it's nice. And I like that you can pop out the shades too, so it's not that I hate it or anything, but with this being my first and only experience with a Natasha Denona palette, I don't know that I would be willing to buy another one, at least not at full price. It would have to be like way discounted if I were willing to try another one. Okay, we are actually now down to the top 2. So my number 2 most used palette of 2023 was the Nomad Ghost Town palette. I used this one 13 times, even though it came out at the end of August. So I only had about 4 months with this palette, but it was still one of my most used palettes. Now, 5 of those looks were filmed for a 1 week 1 palette for my patrons. Of all the Nomad palettes of the year, this was definitely my personal favorite, as you can see from how much I used it. I just think this is such a fun and unexpected mix of shades. I like that all of the color in here is very muted, but still colorful. You know, like it's not neutrals with like the slightest green hint, you know, like these are very green shades, but they still look sort of more on the natural earthy side on your eyes. So I just love that it's, you know, it's colorful but still feels really approachable. And as I've said before, there's really not a single dud shade in this palette. Every single shade is impeccable. Are you ready for my number 1 palette? This one might shock you because it definitely shocked me. And if you know my collection well, maybe you've already figured out what it is by process of elimination. But my number 1 palette I used 18 times in 2023. Klarity So Mermaizing. Who would have thought that this would be, like, yes, I like this palette, but who would have thought that this would be my number 1 most used palette of the year? But the main reason this got so many uses from me this year was because this was in my project pan for a couple of months. I was really trying to hit pan, and I did hit pan on one of the shades in here. It ended up being the shade Oh Ship, which is no surprise because that's my favorite shade in the palette. I used it 18 times between March and August, and I think 16 of those 18 uses were actually while this was in my project pan. So there were only 2 uses where this was not in my project pan. Now, I'm sure there would have been more than that even if I had never put it in my project, but to be fair, I think that's the biggest reason why this got so many uses, because I was really trying to hit pan on this shade. I do like this palette a lot, you know, but I definitely wouldn't say it was my favorite of the year, especially because most of the times that I used this, I think I was only using Oh Ship. I definitely used most of these other shades at least once as well, but most of those 18 times I was just dipping into Oh Ship for an inner corner highlight or for just like a topper on the lid. But that's what project panning does. It makes us use certain things way more than we otherwise would, which can be a good thing. You know, I don't think that's inherently a bad thing, but I feel like it makes more sense to me to just have the products that I used the most throughout the year to be also just my favorite products, things that I'm just naturally gravitating to. So that's what I'm looking forward to in 2024, and that's why I think I am going to do this again in 2024, because now I'm just so curious to see what it will look like when I'm not panning. But I think that is everything from me today. I am losing my voice, so I need to wrap this up. But thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you had fun. If you did, be sure to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already. I do also have a Patreon and a channel membership if you're interested in getting some extra content while also supporting my channel. Otherwise, I hope you all have an amazing rest of your day, and I will talk to you again very soon in my next video.